Welcome to my sports concussion evaluation tool analysis. My name is Nolan Rowe, and today I am going to be walking you through the C3 Logix brain evaluation tool. The first thing that we will need to get into with this is exactly what it is, what it does, and exactly how we can help this to use this to help us treat concussions, that is. So what it actually is it's a computer program. It's mainly used as an app, and in most cases, it's used using an iPad. And what it does is it takes the athlete through a series of tests, and then that series of tests helps to create a baseline. And that baseline then is going to give the physician or athletic trainer a somewhat of basis of how much balance the athlete has, or their reaction time, or other categories which we'll go through in just a minute. But what we find with this is that baseline testing is very important, because then after a player has that concussion, what we can do is we can go through these series of tests once again, and we can match up the scores, and we can see then when can this player go back to the field or onto the court, or whatever the sport is that they so desire. As you can see with the image that I have here, there are many programs like this. The C3 Logix seems to be the most comprehensive from what I've looked at. I'll reference the impact test a few times as I go through my explanations here today. Just to give you an example, so here is an example of a test, and what this test is doing is this is just, as it says at the top, a simple reaction time. So what the athlete would do, and again, creating the baseline, is they would hold and then touch and see how fast once the light changes. So what you would do then is you would do this before your season starts, or typically they recommend once a year biannually to do this. And then if a concussion did occur, you would go back and you would be able to check and see what the test results look like. So the C3 Logix really measures these characteristics that you can see here on the screen. What makes a C3 Logix different, and what's really different about this is the idea of combining all of these together. Other tests, like the ones that were listed on the last slide, like the impact test, really focus on the memory and processing speed. The vision testing, the balance test, which are really made possible through the camera that's used on either an iPhone or an iPad, make it very easy for the technology to get accurate readings. So I'll take you through a series of some of these tests here, and forgive me, I'll have to skip ahead a bit. And what we can see here, so let's start with the balance test. So what you see here, the balance test, you strap the iPad to the back of the individual, and then they're given a series of tests to do, and I'll jump ahead a little bit for you because you're not here to watch the video from me. So they'll do this with their eyes closed, and it's the job of the person who's evaluating to watch and count the number of errors, but the data is actually tracked completely by the iPad. So there's balance tests on here. I can also show you, there's also visual acuity tests. And this one, we don't have a great example for it, but this is basically your general eye test that you can see. Hopefully, if you're a presenter, you get to say, is this better or worse? Then there's also some of the neurocognitive tests, which are also important. And we already kind of went through one of those with the reaction time and how you place things together. Overall, very thorough with its testing. And in doing all of this, we get a comprehensive look because, as we know, concussions can impact different people different ways, and then there's a lot of different symptoms that can come with the concussion. So one of the first steps that I took in my research was looking at what most people want to know about something is, does it actually work? In a test that was done, they were looking at the reliability and the validity of this. And what they really found was there was 38 participants, and over the course of the week, so these were non-concussed athletes, they wanted to see if the scores were going to be the same. So they did both balance and neurocognitive assessments in this. And what they found was that in both instances, the balance had a strong retest reliability, basically meaning that the scores were consistent. And then the neurocognitive was also very valid, and the validity was compared to what would happen with a paper and pencil test, which are the current ones that are being used. So the use of technology is reliable and is valid. And this C3 Logix, which came out of the Cleveland clinic, is now really starting to spread through a lot of areas. What I found next was that in Southwest Pennsylvania, in 2016, the Allegheny Health Network starts to bring this not only to the schools, but to the EMS providers, which I think is really interesting. And what they did was they wanted to train and even test the EMS workers so they understood how it worked. And what they were doing is they would screen people over the age of 10, and really a lot of this was for local sports leagues, so that everyone has a baseline. That way, if a concussion occurs, the community is more educated, and these preemptive screenings are then free that are provided by this area in Pennsylvania. And so what we end up seeing with this is that there can be a lot quicker assessments of concussions, because especially with a really bad concussion, you know that someone's going to call an ambulance, and sometimes it might be a parent, but that information is all in this health network system. And by doing this, and by the government getting involved rather than just the school system, it's really giving access to a lot of people and really expanding the knowledge base using the technology that was created. The next thing that I wanted to look at was basically as what is this C3 Logix really being used for? And one of the things that I found is that the C3 Logix was actually brought in to a much larger evaluation of brain injury called the CIEMTBI. Well, that's a mouthful. A comprehensive instrument for evaluating mild traumatic brain injuries, right? And then what they did was they started using the C3 Logix as a key component because of all of the different and steps that it takes and how thorough that it really is. So what we found with this research, and the big question here was, does it really matter? Do these baseline tests really make a difference? And what this overall test is looking for are the neurocognitive and physical capabilities of individuals that have these mild concussions. And what we find, once again, is that there's high test retest reliability that's going with this, and it's showing that there are positive signs that show that the baseline and the post-testing do help with treating concussions. And it's because of these different instruments that are being created. And the C3 Logix is actually, while it seems very thorough itself, it's even a part of a larger instrument that's being created so that we can have a better understanding, because it still is a very confusing topic. The next thing I looked at was, how is this system being used when it comes to helping those with concussions, right? So we know that the baselines are there and it helps people get back on the field. But what I found was that and using therapy, what we end up finding here, and this is, I'll go back here for a second. So this is head-eye vestibular motion therapy. And what we found here with this type of therapy, what they're doing is they're trying to take an individual and they're running them through a series of steps here. I'm sorry. Let's get this working again. There we go. And what we end up seeing is they're taking this individual through a series of tests, right? And not necessarily tests, but motions, right? Because it's therapy. And in doing these motions, the idea is this is going to reduce individuals, the severity of the symptoms for those people that are really struggling with the concussion symptoms. So what this research found was that it really showed a significant decrease in the symptom severity. Now, in this study, they were taking a look at individuals who had been having severe symptoms for over 6 months, which can be very painstaking for these individuals. And what they found using the C3 Logix system was that those symptoms did actually decrease. It wasn't just the individuals saying that they were decreased. They actually had proven data, and they used this tool to actually record that data, so we know that there's actually progress that's happening. Skip ahead here. All right, so what we'd end up seeing next is the next article that I was able to take a look at is the concussion baseline testing. What we wanted to find out was, are there other factors that go into this? Because yes, we all take in tests, but a lot of things can impact when you take a test, right? Your mood, the time of day. As a teacher myself, I definitely can see a difference between certain individuals if they're hungry, if it's before lunch, if you've ever had a student that has to go to the bathroom. But this is a little bit different. So what they looked at were in this study was what kind of factors really tie in. And they looked at gender, exercise, and learning disorders. And in this, what we were looking at, and in doing this, we're looking at all of the baseline testing, right? So this is that impact program, the C3 Logix. And what they did find is that they did see that gender does have an impact on baseline testing. They found in this that women outperformed men in verbal memory and reaction time. So that's something to take note of. I don't know how much of an impact that would have when we're dealing with concussions, right? But it does have an impact in the sense of when we are looking at the individuals, right? If we're wondering why they may be scoring lower in the first place. But in my opinion, I don't think that the gender has too big of an impact. Something I did find to be very interesting, though, was that strenuous exercise did not impact scores. And we often hear this, and we often think that someone may score a little bit lower, but it really didn't impact the scores as much as you would think. So it had a low to minimum impact. But here's something I think is very important, especially for me as a high school coach, is that when someone has a learning disorders, something like a learning disorder like ADHD can have a big impact. And when we think about ADHD, it impacts the brain already. So it makes kind of the symptoms be more extreme, and it may make a reaction time or a healing time come a little bit slower. So I have to take that into consideration when we're looking at these tests. The other article then that I was able to find and look at, which I think is also pretty fascinating, which was when we're doing these baseline testings, like the impact and the C3 Logix, does it matter the environment that you're in? And when we look at the environment that exists, oftentimes if you're doing a baseline test, what you're going to see is you're going to be in a room, you'll be with one other individual, and you'll be taking these tests. You're using the iPad, it's very quiet, you can concentrate. But when we're looking at these tests and we're looking at, okay, does someone have a concussion in the moment? Doesn't matter if they're in the back of the gymnasium where it's loud and there's a basketball game going on. Does that really make a difference? And what the research in this study found was that there were no significant changes that existed. But I will point out that there was a pretty small sample group. This was only done with 9 individuals. So this is something I'd probably like to see a more expansive study done, but I do think that that's an interesting point to make. Now, as we look into the longer term, right, I don't think environments are going to matter as much, because if somebody does have a concussion, what we would see is that their return to play would be retaking and retaking these tests until they've hit their baseline scores once. So when we look at kind of the overall findings of when we're looking at the C3 Logix, some of the strengths that I see is it's very user-friendly. You know, an iPad's pretty easy to use. It's hard to mess up, it's accurate. The camera on it is very helpful, and it's really easy for people to use. It's also very thorough. When we look at that list of, we're looking at visual acuity, balance, reaction time, all of these different types of tests really give an overall overall good look at the individual in creating that baseline. The fact that it's portable as well allows us to do it in a lot of different places. If we think if everyone had to go to the hospital to get their baseline testing done, that would make things very